Welcome, I am Nidanoski, and we are here with a Night of the Full Moon video. Now this is a unique video. I haven't really done one of these before, but I wanted to get your opinions in honor of upcoming Halloween of what Red's best class is. Now for those of you who may not know or may be looking into Night of the Full Moon for the first time, well, it's all about Red Riding Hood, or as she's known in Night of the Full Moon, Red. Her grandmother's been kidnapped, and she must journey into the dark forest to save her. She'll meet many a mysterious figure and have an epic, if somewhat sad, conclusion to her tale. Now, how she gets there is up to the players. They could get there as the knight, as the ranger, as the nun, as the witch, as the magician, as the apothecary, as the werewolf, as the soul hunter, and as the mechanic. Oh, hello, WKEP and McGwee. We're just discussing exactly how our community voted to determine what the first bracket would be if we paired these classes head to head. Now, as I said, you could get there any of these ways, but we all have our favorite ways. My favorite, in this case, doesn't matter. I instead reached out to all of you to hear what you had to say over the last week. And in that last week or so, you've definitely made your voices clear. We're going to go over the winners of this bracket, and we're not going to talk about them too much since we'll have future videos, but we're going to go over those who were left behind and talk about their mechanics and why they might have been chosen as the losers of our first bracket. Nun, yes, the nun did get the first bye in this, and so she will advance randomly to the second set, where she will be in our very first poll. And make sure you're subscribed and checking our community polls if you want a chance to vote in the second bracket. For the first bracket option, we had the witch versus the knight. Now in this is one I honestly expected the other way around. The knight is the only class that is free in both the Steam version and the mobile version. It is arguably the easiest class to play. Yes, Soul Hunter. We're going to talk about the Soul Hunter, McGwee. But for now, the Knight and the Witch, the Knight was by far the easiest one to play depending on how you made the build. You could go a little bit more strategic, but the Knight was unfortunately beaten out by the Witch. That means we're going to go over what the Knight had going for her in our handy-dandy card index. Now, for those of you who've never been in here, you can sort all of the available cards you have. You can sort by full moon or diaries, and you can sort by type. So we're going to talk about equipment first, since the Knight is a diary card. Or diary class, excuse me. And here we have our first major choice: the Fatal Fork, Mechanical Fist, and the Sleeping Wine Knight. Now in this case, these equipment determine how most people will play the Knight. The Fatal Fork will let you, the player, use an attack card twice by discarding the leftmost card. This is not optional, which means you have to be very strategic in how you play. Mechanical Fist synergizes actions and attack cards, allowing you to gain double damage and an additional action next turn when you use an attack. And the Sleeping Wine Knight, which is my favorite, and I know a very popular choice of the Knight's options, and it lets you carry everything but the kitchen sink and whack them with your heavy backpack of equipment. Yes, I can turn down the sound of the game. Let me do that. Thank you for telling me. The witch is amazing. And yes, the witch beat out the knight in this. I think she beat the knight out because the knight really can go autopilot. And a lot of people play this to create strategies, build great decks. And the witch not only can out-damage the knight in certain circumstances, but you get there by use of a bit more strategy. The knight, while it does have synergistic capabilities, it simply doesn't have all of the complexities that the witch has. And so when we look at our poll, the knight lost out by only a narrow margin, 44% of the vote, with witch advancing to the second bracket. Now we're going to go on to our next poll. The next poll was against the mechanic and the ranger. Oh, it's not a problem at all. Is this any better? Now, the ranger class is a little bit different in that its diary cards really don't add a lot for me. They're fun. They add a bit of flair, but they don't really synergize with the rest of her deck, and I think that is why she ultimately lost out to the mechanic. The mechanic is the newer class. It is the fun class. It is the class that they really worked, I want to say the hardest on, though that might have gone to the Soul Hunter, but they did make the mechanic to be their last and best class, I think, in the developers' eyes. And that really translated. Whereas the Ranger, it got some support, certainly more than the Werewolf did, but honestly, its diary cards really muddled the water, and so the DLC, which was made to enhance it, never followed through. And let's just go over what their diary cards are. We have the diver gloves. This is my favorite of the ranger equipments, and that gives you increasing damage as you get more and more gold. The architecture tools, which plays into the amazing antiques and be learned, which allows you to get a whole lot of random assortments, but the Apothecary does randomness way better. And then there's the Sharp Blade. The Sharp Blade gets you double bleeding effects, but you need to have bleeding on there, and it really is kind of a mess. Honestly, I did not expect the Ranger to get past the first bracket. I know a lot of people have their troubles with it, but let's talk about things that it does well. And for that, we need to go back to their normal cards. So let's go to our Ranger. I love the longbow and the cards that get the longbow out. Each time you play an action card, deal a damage. This can really start to stack. I love their dodge ability. She can be an epic dodger and can randomly win the game on the highest difficulty merely because her opponent can't hit her. She can definitely stack her actions up, and this does work with bleeding. She can add some pranks into her deck, but she doesn't focus it. Overall, I think there was a lot of opportunity to translate her into a better class when her Diary DLC came out, and unfortunately what they did just didn't translate through. Alright, and I want to say thank you all for joining us so far, and I appreciate you shouting out to support the channel, WKP. But we're going to go ahead and go on to our third bracket. Now, the third bracket, this one I expected the solution, because if the Ranger was a class where the cards didn't translate through, the Werewolf versus the Magician, it's clear that one of them is downright incomplete. And when I talk about that, let's go to our adventure. You can see every class here is focused on telling a story about red, except one, and that is the Werewolf, the Carpenter's son. Now, the Werewolf isn't a bad set, but it is an incomplete one. It got the first 3 chapters like everyone else, but when the Gears of Fate DLC came around, it was the only class, for story reasons that we won't discuss here, that didn't get a chapter 4. This meant that if you chose to play the werewolf, you were choosing to play an incomplete game. The original game, but an incomplete one. However, it is still fun to play. Let's talk about the werewolf for a moment. It is not a diary class, so all of its cards are available in the normal index. And ultimately, this is a class, I believe it was their first class, that showed up without an automatic equipment. And that was because it received a new mechanic altogether, the Rage mechanic. The Rage mechanic is set into the game to allow you to passively attack once you built it up. It had a 2 cap and would deal damage as it went on. You could increase the cap through a variety of ways. What this did that I really loved, even better than the Ranger, was it had action economy that really took off. It had a bunch of abilities, such as Moonlight. During this combat, gain rage ×1 for each action card you play. That meant every card after that, you played an action, got an extra effect, your cards evolved. Call of the Wild, trigger all attack cards that have been exiled. This was a very exile-heavy set, and I really liked that. For me, the werewolf loses not because the concept isn't good, but because he wasn't red, and didn't get the Chapter 4 treatment. And with that, the Magician, which we'll talk about as we continue this series, did. Magician was fairly complex. It wasn't, I think, as complex as some of the sets we're going to talk about, but it had just as good synergy as the werewolf, better card variety than the werewolf, and a complete Chapter 4. And so when we look at how they performed, the Magician beat out the werewolf 63% to 38%. And that would be a lot, except that we have the Soul Hunter coming up. The Soul Hunter was the second to last DLC available, and everything about the Soul Hunter was different than any other class they'd released up to this point. Let's just take a look at all of these wonderful, happy reds. You know, the Apothecary is a bit upset. We'll get to her. But then we have the Soul Hunter, who does not mess around. This is perhaps the most challenging of the classes to play. I've always maintained that. And we'll talk more about her as these videos continue. I think it's because she's the most challenging, though, that a lot of people have a ton of fun. Alright, have fun, McGwee. Thanks for stopping by. The Soul Hunter beat out the Apothecary horribly, 69% to 31%. And it's that challenge rating, the fact that you have so much more to do with her, and that the Apothecary is a little bit random, that I think won the Soul Hunter her day. But let's talk about the Apothecary for just a moment. The Apothecary is the last of our classes that got the diary treatment. And so I should have gone to diary first. And the Apothecary was really made with the diary in mind. It's one of the reasons why I was a little surprised at how poorly she did in the polls, because her entire set seemed to be set around these equipment cards. And we have the Cocktail Shaker, which works with effectives. I don't know why they renamed it to effective. It used to be named something else, but ultimately it allows you to increase the ability of your potions and then launch all your potions out. We had the selected recipes, one of my favorites, where when you exile a card, you get 1 mana and shuffle a card with the effect doubled. This is a random card and goes into your deck, and so you can play tons of cards because you're generating mana. The cards are all cheap mana, and they get double effects. It really is a ramp up and build. Yes, it can be one of the most broken classes. And then you have the Blend Beaker, another one of my favorites. This allows you to combine the potions that you get, and we'll show those off. Combine the potions that you get into one powerful potion over and over and over again. And this really helps get everything set up for victory. That regardless of what you do, each of these diary equipments are great. As bad as the Ranger was in diary, Apothecary was made for diary mode, and the equipment that you get from her, the class just feels incomplete if you ever elect not to play with diaries. And that is our first bracket. Make sure you stay subscribed as we continue to come out with these polls. We're going to go into our next round. Again, the Nun, which we bypassed this time, is going to get her first chance to be voted for. She's a great set, but I don't know if she'll do too well. Maybe I'll be surprised. I think I know who the winners are going to be for the semifinal and the final, but you have the vote. You can decide how this goes. So come back as I release them one by one and let us know what your favorite class for Night of the Full Moon is. In the meantime, I am Nidanoski, and as always, have fun.